You probably won't survive what happened inside 112 Ocean Avenue on November 13, 1974. And frankly, 6 members of the DeFeo family didn't either. The house sits in Amityville, Long Island, a quiet suburban community nestled along the southern shore where the biggest excitement usually involves high school football games, summer clam bakes, and the occasional fender bender at the local shopping plaza. But on this particular Wednesday night, while most families were settling in for dinner and the evening news, something unspeakably evil was stalking through the Dutch colonial home that would become America's most notorious address, its white clapboard siding and distinctive quarter-moon windows hiding a nightmare that would haunt the American consciousness for decades. You need to understand that before it became a symbol of supernatural terror, 112 Ocean Avenue was simply home to the DeFeo family, Ronald Sr., his wife Louise, and their 5 children, who represented the best of 1970s American suburban prosperity. The house itself commanded respect in the neighborhood, a substantial 3-story structure built in the Dutch colonial style that spoke of success and stability. Its manicured lawn stretched down to the water's edge, where the family kept a small boat for weekend fishing excursions, and its interior featured the kind of wall-to-wall carpeting and wood-paneled rooms that defined middle-class aspiration in the post-Vietnam era. Ronald DeFeo Sr. worked for his father-in-law's Buick dealership in nearby Brooklyn, commuting daily to a job that provided the comfortable income necessary to maintain their lifestyle. He was a man who believed in hard work, Catholic values, and the American dream's promise that dedication and determination could secure a better life for your children. Louise DeFeo was the kind of mother who organized neighborhood block parties, volunteered at the local Catholic school, and maintained the kind of household where dinner was served promptly at 6 o'clock and homework was completed before television privileges were granted. Their children seemed to embody the promise of suburban success. Dawn, 18, was a popular high school senior with college plans and a steady boyfriend who'd already asked Ronald Sr.'s permission to propose after graduation. 16-year-old Allison displayed artistic talents that had her teachers suggesting art school applications, while 13-year-old Mark excelled at Little League and dreamed of playing professional baseball. 12-year-old John Matthew was the family comedian, always ready with a joke or impression that could lighten any mood around the dinner table. But you need to see the shadow that had been growing over this picture-perfect family throughout 1974, embodied in their eldest son, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr., known to everyone as Butch. While his siblings thrived in their various pursuits, Butch had become increasingly unstable, cycling through jobs and relationships with a kind of destructive pattern that worried his parents and frightened his younger brothers and sisters. He'd dropped out of college, been fired from multiple positions at the family dealership, and developed what appeared to be serious substance abuse problems that made his behavior unpredictable and sometimes violent. You watch him throughout the months leading up to November 13th as he exhibits the classic signs of someone spiraling toward catastrophe. He steals money from the family business to support his drug habit, lies compulsively about his whereabouts and activities, and displays increasingly paranoid behavior that makes even casual conversations feel dangerous. His parents try everything they can, think of therapy sessions, tough love approaches, financial incentives, even threats of permanent exile from the family, but nothing seems to reach whatever darkness has taken root in their eldest son's psyche. The family dynamics had become increasingly strained as Butch's problems consumed more and more of everyone's emotional energy. Family dinners often ended in shouting matches between father and son, with Louise trying to mediate while the younger children retreated to their rooms to avoid the conflict. Neighbors began to notice the tension, occasionally overhearing arguments that seemed to grow more intense and frequent as the year progressed. Some later recalled feeling sorry for Louise, who appeared to age rapidly as she struggled to hold her family together while protecting her younger children from their brother's increasingly erratic behavior. Here's the detail that makes this story even more chilling. Butch DeFeo had been researching his family's life insurance policies in the weeks before the murders, asking detailed questions about beneficiaries and payout schedules that should have raised immediate red flags. He'd also been making subtle threats about what would happen if his parents cut him off financially, suggesting that they might regret treating him so poorly. These weren't the ramblings of someone overcome by supernatural forces. They were the calculated preparations of someone planning multiple homicides for profit. The evening of November 13th unfolds with the kind of mundane routine that makes what follows even more horrific by comparison. Louise DeFeo spends the afternoon preparing pot roast and mashed potatoes, the family's traditional Wednesday dinner, while coordinating carpools for her children's various after-school activities. Ronald Sr. arrives home from work at his usual time, kisses his wife hello, and settles into his favorite chair to read the newspaper while waiting for dinner. The younger children complete homework assignments and discuss weekend plans, creating the warm background noise of family life that millions of American households would recognize. Dawn helps her mother set the dining room table using the good china that Louise reserves for family dinners, a tradition she'd inherited from her own mother and hoped to pass down to her daughters. Allison practices piano in the living room, working through a batch piece that she performed at the spring recital. Mark and John Matthew argued good-naturedly over television channels, their voices mixing with the sounds of dinner preparation and the distant hum of evening traffic along Ocean Avenue. Even Butch seems calmer than usual during dinner, participating in family conversation without the edge of hostility that had characterized his recent interactions. He compliments his mother's cooking, asks Mark about an upcoming baseball game, and discusses plans for Thanksgiving dinner with apparent genuine interest. To an outside observer, the DeFeo family would have appeared to be enjoying a normal family meal, their conversation flowing easily between work updates, school activities, and neighborhood gossip. After dinner, the family follows their established evening routine. Ronald Sr. helps Louise clear the table before settling in front of the television to watch the news, while the children drift to their various activities: homework, telephone conversations with friends, and the kind of idle teenage pursuits that fill suburban evenings. Butch retreats to his bedroom, ostensibly to listen to music and read magazines, though he's actually making final preparations for what will happen after everyone falls asleep. Around 3:15 a.m. on November 14th, when the house has been quiet for hours, and his family lies in the deep sleep of people who feel completely safe in their own home, Butch DeFeo retrieves his .35 caliber Marlin rifle from his bedroom closet and begins systematically executing every member of his family. You follow him as he moves through the house with methodical precision, starting with his parents' bedroom where Ronald Sr. and Louise sleep peacefully in the king-size bed they'd bought to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary. The first shots shatter the silence of the house, but remarkably, they do unwake the other children, a detail that will later fuel supernatural theories about the house's evil influence, though more prosaic explanations involving the home's solid construction, the family's habit of sleeping with bedroom doors closed, and the children's natural deep sleep patterns are equally plausible. The .35 caliber rifle produces a sharp crack rather than a thunderous boom, and the sound is somewhat muffled by the house's thick walls and heavy carpeting. Butch continues methodically to his siblings' bedrooms, moving with the calm efficiency of someone following a carefully rehearsed plan. Dawn dies in her sleep, never knowing that her beloved big brother has become her killer. Allison is shot while lying on her stomach, her artistic hand still clutching the pillow that had cushioned her dreams of college and creative fulfillment. Mark and John Matthew, sharing a bedroom as they'd done since childhood, are killed within moments of each other, their young lives ending before they can fully comprehend the danger that has entered their sanctuary. The entire massacre takes less than 15 minutes, each family member killed with a single shot fired at close range, while they lay defenseless in their beds. There are no signs of struggle, no evidence that anyone tried to flee or fight back, suggesting that each victim died without fully awakening from sleep. The house that had been filled with the sounds of family life just hours earlier now contains only silence and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the lingering aromas of Louise's pot roast dinner. What happens next reveals the calculating nature of Butch DeFeo's psychology and demolishes any suggestion that he was acting under supernatural compulsion or temporary insanity. After killing his entire family, he calmly places the rifle back in his bedroom closet, showers to remove any blood spatter or gunpowder residue, changes into fresh clothes, and methodically cleans up any evidence that might connect him to the murders. He then goes to work at his grandfather's Buick dealership as if nothing has happened, spending the entire day selling cars and making small talk with customers while 6 corpses decompose in his family home. Historians still debate whether DeFeo's ability to function normally for an entire day after committing multiple murders indicates psychopathy, careful premeditation, or some combination of both factors. But his behavior clearly demonstrates that he was in complete control of his actions and aware of their consequences. He even calls the house several times during the day, apparently to check whether anyone has discovered the bodies, and makes plans to meet friends for drinks after work, hardly the actions of someone overwhelmed by supernatural forces or consumed by guilty conscience. The bodies aren't discovered until evening, when Butch returns home with friends from Henry's bar and dramatically discovers the massacre. running into Ocean Avenue screaming that his family has been murdered. His performance is convincing enough that neighbors and police initially treat him as a traumatized survivor rather than a suspect, with several people later describing how genuinely distraught he appeared as he collapsed on the front lawn, hyperventilating and sobbing uncontrollably. But you need to fast forward 13 months to December 1975, when the house at 112 Ocean Avenue is about to claim its next victims, though this time, the destruction will be psychological rather than physical. George and Kathy Lutz stand in the empty living room where the DeFeo family once gathered for evening television, admiring the hardwood floors and built-in bookcases, while their real estate agent carefully avoids mentioning exactly where each body was found. The house is being offered at a significant discount because of its notorious history, but the Lutzes see an opportunity to own their dream home at a price they can actually afford. George Lutz is a surveyor who's been married to Kathy for just 2 months, taking on the role of stepfather to her 3 children from a previous marriage: 9-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Melissa. He's a practical man who doesn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, viewing the house's dark history as other people's superstition that happens to benefit his family's budget. Kathy shares his pragmatic approach, focusing on the home's excellent school district, spacious bedrooms, and waterfront location rather than dwelling on events that can't be changed or undone. They purchase 112 Ocean Avenue for $80,000, roughly $30,000 less than comparable homes in the neighborhood, and begin making plans to move in before Christmas. The previous owner's belongings have been removed, but some furniture remains, including several pieces that belonged to the DeFeo family. The Lutzes decide to keep these items, partly for financial reasons and partly because they seem to fit perfectly with the house's traditional colonial aesthetic. Here's the quirky detail that will later seem ominous in retrospect. George Lutz develops an obsession with the house's boiler system from the moment they move in, spending hours in the basement adjusting temperatures and checking fuel consumption as if maintaining the perfect indoor climate has become his primary responsibility. He complains constantly about feeling cold despite the heating system running continuously, leading to utility bills that strain the family's already tight budget. The first strange incident occurs on their very first night in the house, December 18, 1975. Lying in bed with the Lutz family when they reawakened around 3:15 a.m., the exact time the DeFeo murders occurred, by what sounds like a marching band practicing in their living room. George investigates but finds nothing unusual, though he notices that the house feels significantly colder than when they went to bed, despite the heating system running at full capacity. Over the following days, the incidents escalate in both frequency and intensity. Doors slam shut on their own, windows open by themselves despite being securely latched, and strange odors, particularly the smell of perfume that Kathy doesn't recognize, appear throughout the house without explanation. The children begin having nightmares about a demonic figure with glowing red eyes that watches them from their bedroom doorways, while George develops insomnia and spends his nights wandering the house like a security guard patrolling a dangerous facility. Kathy experiences what she describes as an invisible presence that follows her through the house, sometimes touching her hair or breathing on her neck when she's alone in a room. She finds mysterious stains on her clothing that weren't there when she got dressed, discovers that food she's prepared for dinner has spoiled overnight, despite being stored properly, and notices that her reflection in bathroom mirrors sometimes appears distorted or accompanied by shadows that don't correspond to anything in the room. The family's financial situation deteriorates rapidly as George becomes unable to focus on his surveying work, missing appointments and making calculation errors that cost him several important contracts. He spends most of his time at the house claiming he needs to monitor the heating system and investigate the source of various mysterious sounds. But his behavior suggests someone who's afraid to leave his family alone in what he is beginning to suspect is a genuinely dangerous environment. By early January 1976, the supernatural activity has escalated to include physical attacks on family members. Kathy wakes up with unexplained bruises on her arms and legs, while George discovers scratches on his chest that appear overnight and seem to form deliberate patterns rather than random marks. The children refuse to sleep in their own bedrooms, instead camping out in the living room where they feel safer as a group, though even there they report seeing glowing eyes watching them from the staircase. The most terrifying incident occurs on January 8 when George claims to witness the front door of the house opening and closing, repeatedly while an invisible presence moves through the rooms, rearranging furniture and opening every cabinet and drawer in the kitchen. He calls the police, but by the time officers arrive, everything appears normal except for the overwhelming smell of sulfur that seems to emanate from the basement heating system. Religious intervention comes in the form of Father Ralph Pecoraro, a Catholic priest who agrees to bless the house at Kathy's desperate request. During his visit on January 11th, Father Pecoraro reports hearing a disembodied voice command him to get out. While he's performing the blessing ceremony in the children's bedroom, he later claims that his car breaks down repeatedly while driving away from the house, and that he develops a mysterious fever that lasts for several days after the encounter. You witness the family's final night in the house on January 14, 1976, when the supernatural activity reaches a crescendo that drives them to flee with only the clothes on their backs. George claims that every door and window in the house begins opening and closing simultaneously, while invisible forces move furniture around the rooms and strange music plays from sources that couldn't be identified. The children huddle together in the living room, crying and begging to leave. While Kathy prays desperately for protection from whatever evil has invaded their home, they abandon the house at approximately 3:15 a.m. again, the time of the DeFeo murders, taking nothing but their car keys and fleeing to Kathy's mother's house in nearby Deer Park. George later returns with police escorts to retrieve essential belongings, but he refuses to spend another night under the roof of 12 Ocean Avenue, claiming that the evil presence in the house has made it clear that the family is no longer welcome there. The Amityville horror story might have ended there, dismissed as the psychological breakdown of a family dealing with financial stress and the morbid associations of living in a former murder scene. But the Lutz's experience attracts the attention of paranormal investigators, journalists, and eventually a writer named Jay Anson, who will transform their 28-day ordeal into one of the most successful horror stories in American popular culture. Historians still debate whether the Lutz's experienced genuine supernatural phenomena or suffered a collective psychological reaction to living in a house where 6 people had been murdered, but their account of events remains remarkably consistent across multiple interviews and investigations. They describe specific incidents with precise details, provide timelines that can be verified through utility records and police reports, and display the kind of residual trauma that suggests they genuinely believed they were under attack by forces beyond human understanding. What you need to understand about the Lutz family's experience is that it represents a perfect storm of psychological, financial, and social pressures that could have created the conditions for either genuine supernatural encounters or elaborate psychological delusions. They were a newly blended family dealing with the stress of marriage, step-parenthood, and financial strain, living in a house where horrific murders had occurred just over a year earlier, during the winter months when seasonal depression and cabin fever could have exacerbated any existing mental health issues. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue sits empty once again after the Lutzes flee, its rooms echoing with silence that seems somehow different from the peaceful quiet of other vacant homes. Real estate agents find it even more difficult to show than before, partly because of the growing notoriety surrounding both the DeFeo murders and the Lutz haunting, and partly because of reports from visitors who claim to feel uncomfortable or threatened while touring the property. The local community begins to split between those who believe the Lutzes experienced genuine supernatural phenomena and those who suspect the family either fabricated their story for financial gain or suffered a collective nervous breakdown triggered by living in a former crime scene. This division will only deepen as the Amityville story spreads beyond Long Island, eventually dividing the entire country between believers and skeptics, who see the same evidence and reach completely different conclusions. But you're about to discover that the truth behind the Amityville horror is far more complex than either simple belief or dismissive skepticism would suggest, involving a web of financial motives, psychological manipulation, and media exploitation that transforms a family's genuine trauma into one of the most profitable supernatural frauds in American history. You need to understand that the Lutz family's terrifying ordeal might have remained a local curiosity, whispered about in Long Island diners and debated at suburban cocktail parties, if not for a chance encounter that would transform their private nightmare into a global phenomenon. In September 1977, nearly 2 years after fleeing 112 Ocean Avenue, George and Kathy Lutz meet author Jay Anson through a mutual acquaintance at a gathering where ghost stories are being shared as entertainment. Anson, a professional writer looking for his next project, recognizes immediately that the Lutzes possess something invaluable, a truly terrifying story that combines real murder, supernatural horror, and the kind of middle-class protagonists that American audiences can easily identify with. Jay Anson approaches the Amityville story with the calculated precision of someone who understands exactly what elements make supernatural horror commercially successful. He is not particularly interested in investigating whether the Lutz's claims are factually accurate. His goal is crafting a narrative that will captivate readers and generate substantial profits for everyone involved. The truth becomes secondary to the story's entertainment value, a decision that will have profound consequences for both the Lutz family and the American public. This understanding of what actually happened at 112 Ocean Avenue, working from 45 hours of tape-recorded interviews with George and Kathy Lutz, Anson begins constructing what he markets as a true account of supernatural terror. Though his methodology reveals someone more interested in dramatic effect than journalistic accuracy, he embellishes details, adds scenes that the Lutzes never described, and creates a chronological narrative from experiences that George and Kathy remember as fragmented and confusing. The result is a story that's far more coherent and terrifying than the actual events probably were, but also significantly more fictional than readers are led to believe. Here rests the quirky detail that reveals Anson's commercial instincts. He insists on changing the Lutz family dog's name from Harry to Harry because he believes the more common name will help readers form emotional connections with the family's pet, making them more invested in the animal's welfare during supernatural attacks. This kind of calculated manipulation appears throughout the book, with Anson consistently choosing dramatic impact over factual accuracy whenever the two conflict. The Amityville Horror, a true story, is published by Prentice Hall in September 1977 and becomes an immediate bestseller, tapping into America's growing fascination with the supernatural during a decade marked by spiritual searching and skepticism toward traditional authority. The book appears at the perfect cultural moment, when Americans are simultaneously embracing New Age spirituality and losing faith in government institutions following Watergate and Vietnam. Anson's tale of ordinary suburbanites under attack by demonic forces resonates with readers who feel their own lives are threatened by invisible enemies they can't understand or control. The book's success transforms the Lutz family from private individuals dealing with trauma into public celebrities managing a media empire. They appear on television talk shows, grant interviews to national magazines, and participate in promotional tours that take them across the country. George Lutz, who once worked as a surveyor in relative anonymity, finds himself discussing demon possession with Johnny Carson and debating supernatural theology with university professors. The financial rewards are substantial, but the psychological costs of constant public scrutiny begin to strain the family's already fragile emotional state. The media attention attracts paranormal investigators, who view the Amityville case as an opportunity to legitimize their field through association with a best-selling book and famous haunting. Ed and Lorraine Warren, self-proclaimed demonologists who've built careers investigating supernatural claims, arrive at 112 Ocean Avenue with recording equipment, cameras, and the kind of scientific instruments that lend credibility to what might otherwise be dismissed as superstition. Their investigation, conducted in September 1977, produces evidence that they claim supports the Lutz's account while adding new layers of supernatural complexity to the story. The Warrens report detecting electromagnetic anomalies throughout the house, recording unexplained sounds and voices, and photographing mysterious light phenomena that they interpret as evidence of demonic activity. Their most dramatic claim involves capturing an image of what appears to be a young boy peering around a staircase. Bannister photograph that becomes one of the most famous pieces of alleged supernatural evidence in American paranormal research, though skeptics later argue that it shows nothing more than light reflecting off wood grain in ways that create the illusion of facial features. You witness the birth of a cultural phenomenon as the Amityville story spreads beyond books and television into movies, documentaries, and countless imitator accounts. The 1979 film adaptation, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder, grosses over $86 million worldwide and spawns a franchise that will eventually include more than a dozen sequels, remakes, and spin-offs. The movie transforms the Lutz family's experience into a standardized horror formula that can be endlessly repeated and adapted for new audiences. The success of both book and film creates what sociologists call a cultural feedback loop, where fictional elements added by Anson and Hollywood filmmakers become incorporated into public understanding of the true Amityville story. People who never read the original book or spoken to the Lutz family develop strong opinions about what happened at 112 Ocean Avenue based on movies that are increasingly distant from any historical reality. The story becomes more powerful as mythology than it ever was as autobiography. This process of mythologization is accelerated by the involvement of Catholic Church officials, who conduct their own investigation of the house and eventually perform what they describe as a full exorcism to cleanse the property of demonic influence. The Church's participation lends institutional authority to claims about supernatural activity, though historians still debate whether official Catholic involvement represents genuine belief in the phenomena or calculated public relations, designed to maintain the Church's relevance during a period of declining religious observance. The exorcism ceremony, conducted in secrecy during the winter of 1970-78, reportedly involves multiple priests working for several days to remove demonic entities that have taken up residence in the house. According to participants, the ritual is marked by dramatic supernatural manifestations including levitating objects, disembodied voices speaking in ancient languages, and temperature fluctuations that cause windows to frost over despite mild weather conditions. The priests claim victory over the demonic forces, but they also warn that the house will always carry some residual supernatural energy that could reactivate under the right circumstances. The Amityville phenomenon begins generating its own ecosystem of believers, skeptics, researchers, and opportunists who see profit in association with America's most famous haunted house. Ghost tours begin offering visits to Ocean Avenue, though tourists are kept at a respectful distance from the actual property. Paranormal investigation groups cite Amityville as validation for their research methods. Academic researchers publish papers analyzing the case as an example of mass hysteria, media manipulation, or genuine supernatural activity, depending on their theoretical perspectives. Local residents of Amityville find themselves living in a community that's become synonymous with supernatural horror, a situation that produces mixed reactions ranging from pride in their town's fame to frustration with the constant stream of curiosity seekers and media attention. Property values in the neighborhood fluctuate wildly as some buyers avoid the area while others are attracted by its notoriety. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue becomes simultaneously the most famous and most difficult property to sell in suburban Long Island. What you need to understand about this media explosion is that it represents a fundamental transformation in how Americans consume stories about the supernatural. The Amityville horror creates a template for marketing real-life paranormal claims as entertainment, blurring the distinction between journalism and fiction in ways that make it nearly impossible for audiences to separate fact from embellishment. This approach will influence decades of ghost hunting television shows, paranormal investigation books, and supernatural horror films that claim to be based on true events while taking extraordinary liberties with historical accuracy. The success also establishes a financial incentive structure that rewards dramatic supernatural claims regardless of their veracity. The more terrifying and unbelievable the story, the more books it sells and the more movie tickets it generates. This creates pressure for future paranormal claimants to escalate their accounts beyond what they actually experienced, leading to an arms race of supernatural storytelling where each new haunting must be more spectacular than the last to capture public attention. But you're about to discover that the real horror of the Amityville story is supernatural at all its, the very human corruption that occurs when truth becomes secondary to profit, and when people's genuine trauma is transformed into commercial entertainment without regard for the psychological cost to those who lived through the original experiences. You arrive at 112 Ocean Avenue in the fall of 1979 alongside a small army of investigators, debunkers, and curiosity seekers who've descended on Amityville like antibodies responding to an infection. The house has become a battlefield where paranormal researchers clash with skeptical scientists, where true believers confront dedicated debunkers, and where the Catholic Church finds itself defending claims about demonic possession against accusations of medieval superstition. What you're witnessing is nothing less than a war for America's supernatural soul, fought with tape recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, and theological arguments that echo through the quiet streets of suburban Long Island. Dr. Stephen Kaplan, a paranormal investigator from the Parapsychology Institute of America, arrives with a team of researchers determined to either validate or debunk the Lutz family's claims using rigorous scientific methodology. Kaplan approaches the investigation with genuine skepticism. Having spent years studying supernatural claims and learning to distinguish between authentic phenomena and elaborate hoaxes, his team brings sophisticated recording equipment, temperature monitoring devices, and electromagnetic field detectors that can measure even subtle environmental changes that might indicate paranormal activity. Their initial investigation reveals troubling inconsistencies in the Lutz's account that suggest either faulty memory or deliberate deception. The family claims that windows and doors opened by themselves throughout their 28-day residence, but examination of the house's hardware shows that many of the locks and latches are damaged or improperly installed in ways that would cause them to fail under normal conditions. The mysterious cold spots that drove George Lutz to obsessive heating system maintenance are easily explained by poor insulation and a furnace system that requires expensive repairs the family couldn't afford. Here's the detail that begins to unravel the supernatural explanation. Kaplan discovers that several of the most dramatic incidents described in Jay Anson's book occurred on dates when the Lutz family wasn't even living in the house. Utility records show that electricity and heating were turned off for 3-day periods in late December 1975 and early January 1976, indicating that the family had temporarily moved out during some of the time when they claimed to be under supernatural attack. This suggests that their 28-day ordeal was actually interrupted by periods when they sought refuge elsewhere, undermining the narrative of being trapped in a haunted house. The investigation takes a dramatic turn when Father Ralph Pecoraro, the priest who claimed to have heard a demonic voice command him to leave during his blessing of the house, agrees to be interviewed by Kaplan's team. Under careful questioning, Pecoraro admits that his initial account was exaggerated, and that he may have been influenced by the family's expectations and his own suggestible state. Following the emotionally charged blessing ceremony, he acknowledges that the voice he heard could have been his own internal thoughts amplified by the stress of performing an exorcism in a house where 6 people had been murdered. Meanwhile, police investigators begin reviewing their records of calls to 112 Ocean Avenue during the Lutz family's residence, discovering a pattern that contradicts the supernatural narrative. Rather than documenting strange phenomena that officers couldn't explain, the reports describe domestic disturbances, noise complaints, and welfare checks that suggest a family under severe psychological and financial stress. The mysterious sulfur odors that supposedly emanated from demonic forces are traced to a malfunctioning septic system that the family couldn't afford to repair. The most damaging evidence against the supernatural explanation comes from interviews with the Lutz children, now old enough to discuss their experiences without parental supervision. Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa describe a household dominated by their stepfather's increasingly erratic behavior, their mother's growing anxiety, and constant arguments about money and living arrangements. While they remember being frightened during their time in the house, their fear was directed toward George Lutz's volatile moods rather than supernatural entities. The demonic figure with glowing red eyes that supposedly watched them from doorways is revealed to be George himself, prowling the house during his insomniac episodes. Historians still debate whether George Lutz consciously fabricated the supernatural elements of their Amityville experience or genuinely believed he was under demonic attack, but the evidence suggests a combination of psychological breakdown, financial desperation, and opportunistic exploitation of a tragic situation. The family was struggling with debt, unemployment, and the stress of blending to households in a house they couldn't really afford, creating conditions that could easily produce the kind of paranoid delusions that might be interpreted as supernatural experiences. The investigation reveals a more disturbing truth about the supposed blessing ceremony that Father Pecoraro performed in the house. Catholic Church records showed that no official exorcism was ever conducted at 112 Ocean Avenue, and that Pecораro's involvement was limited to a brief house blessing that ES routinely performed for Catholic families moving into new homes. The dramatic exorcism described in later accounts appears to have been entirely fictional, created to add religious authority to the supernatural claims, and provide theological context for what was actually a family's psychological crisis. Dr. William Roll, one of America's most respected parapsychologists, conducts his own investigation and reaches conclusions that devastate the credibility of the Amityville claims. Roll, who has spent decades studying genuine paranormal phenomena, and has validated several authentic cases of supernatural activity, finds no evidence of ghostly or demonic presence at 112 Ocean Avenue. His detailed analysis of the alleged supernatural incidents reveals prosaic explanations for every single claimed manifestation, from foundation settling that causes doors to swing open to electromagnetic interference from nearby power lines that could affect sensitive individuals. The Catholic Church's official position on the Amityville case evolves as more evidence emerges about the fabricated nature of the supernatural claims. While church officials initially supported the idea that demonic forces might be active in the house, they gradually distanced themselves from the case as investigations revealed the lack of credible evidence for supernatural activity. The Diocese of Rockville Center eventually issues a statement acknowledging that no official church investigation ever validated the presence of evil spirits at 112 Ocean Avenue. You witness the unraveling of the Amityville phenomenon as journalists begin investigating the financial relationships between the various parties involved in promoting the story. Jay Anson, George and Kathy Lutz, and their lawyer William Weber had entered into profit-sharing agreements that gave everyone involved strong financial incentives to maintain and embellish the supernatural narrative regardless of its truth. The more books that sold and the more movie rights that were optioned, the more money everyone made from keeping the Amityville horror alive in public consciousness. The most shocking revelation comes from William Weber himself, the defense attorney who had represented Ronald DeFeo Jr. during his murder trial. In a moment of apparent conscience or perhaps legal strategy, Weber admits that he helped the Lutz family fabricate their supernatural claims as part of a scheme to generate publicity for a possible appeal of DeFeo's conviction. The plan was to argue that demonic forces in the house had influenced both DeFeo's actions and the Lutz family's experiences, creating reasonable doubt about DeFeo's mental state during the murders. Weber's confession reveals that much of the Amityville horror was conceived during a series of meetings where he, George Lutz, and Kathy Lutz collaborated on creating a supernatural narrative that would serve multiple purposes: generating income through book and movie deals, creating publicity for DeFeo's legal case, and providing the family with an explanation for their psychological and financial problems. That didn't require them to take personal responsibility for their situation. The investigation uncovers evidence that several of the most dramatic supernatural incidents described in the book were borrowed from other paranormal cases that Weber had researched during his legal career. The mysterious handprints that supposedly appeared on surfaces throughout the house were similar to phenomena reported in a Connecticut haunting case from the 1960s. The levitating objects and slamming doors matched descriptions from a poltergeist investigation that Weber had studied as a potential precedent for defending clients who claimed supernatural influence. What emerges from these investigations is a picture of the Amityville horror as one of the most elaborate and successful supernatural hoaxes in American history, created by people who understood exactly which elements would make their story believable and marketable to a public hungry for evidence that there's more to reality than what science can measure and explain. The tragedy is that their fabrication was built on the foundation of genuine trauma. Both the DeFeo family's murder and the Lutz family's psychological crisis exploiting real pain to create fictional terror. But you need to understand that the exposure of the Amityville hoax doesn't diminish its cultural impact or reduce its influence on American supernatural beliefs. If anything, the revelation that the story was largely fabricated makes it more interesting as a case study in how modern myths are created, marketed, and sustained even after their fictional nature has been revealed. The Amityville horror succeeds as entertainment precisely because it fails as documentary, providing audiences with the kind of perfectly crafted supernatural narrative that reality rarely delivers. You need to descend deeper into the web of deception that surrounds the Amityville horror, where financial desperation meets psychological manipulation, and where the line between victim and perpetrator becomes impossibly blurred. By 1980, as investigators continue peeling back layers of fabrication, a much darker story emerges, one that reveals how the exploitation of genuine trauma can create its own form of horror that's far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation could ever be. The truth begins with William Weber's law office in the summer of 1975, where Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney is desperately searching for any strategy that might save his client from spending life in prison for murdering his entire family. Weber has already tried the insanity defense, arguing that DeFeo was driven to kill by voices in his head, but the jury rejected that claim and convicted him of 6 counts of second-degree murder. With appeals options running out, Weber needs something dramatic and unprecedented, a legal argument so unusual that it might convince a higher court to reconsider the case. That's when Weber hits upon the idea of supernatural influence. If he can demonstrate that 112 Ocean Avenue is genuinely haunted by evil forces, he might be able to argue that these same demonic entities influenced DeFeo's actions, creating reasonable doubt about his mental state during the murders. It's a desperate strategy, but Weber has nothing to lose and potentially everything to gain if he can make it work. The problem is that he needs credible witnesses to testify about supernatural activity in the house, and that's where the Lutz family enters the picture. You witness the first meeting between Weber and the Lutzes in late 1975. Shortly after they've fled 112 Ocean Avenue, when the lawyer approaches them with a proposal that seems to offer solutions to everyone's problems. The family is facing financial ruin from their brief traumatic residence in the house, dealing with psychological trauma that's affecting their marriage and the children's development, and struggling to explain what happened to them in ways that don't make them sound mentally ill. Weber offers them a different narrative. Instead of being victims of their own psychological breakdown, they can be survivors of supernatural attack. Here's the detail that reveals the calculated nature of this conspiracy. Weber brings boxes of research materials about famous paranormal cases to his meetings with the Lutzes, helping them understand which types of supernatural phenomena are most credible to investigators and most compelling to audiences. They study the Enfield poltergeist case from England, the Borley Rectory haunting, and dozens of American ghost stories, learning the common elements that make supernatural claims believable and marketable. The collaborative process of creating the Amityville horror unfolds over months of meetings, where Weber, George Lutz, and Kathy Lutz work together to craft a supernatural narrative that incorporates elements from their actual experience with dramatic additions borrowed from other paranormal cases. George's genuine insomnia and obsession with the heating system become evidence of demonic influence. Kathy's anxiety and depression are reframed as psychic attacks. The children's nightmares about their stepfather's erratic behavior are transformed into encounters with supernatural entities. Weber's legal strategy requires that the supernatural phenomena be documented and witnessed by credible observers. So the conspirators arrange for Father Pecoraro to visit the house and experience what can later be described as a demonic encounter. The priest, who genuinely wants to help a Catholic family dealing with trauma, agrees to perform a house blessing without understanding that his visit is being orchestrated to create evidence for both a book deal and a legal appeal. The plan expands beyond its original legal purpose. When Weber realizes that the Amityville story has significant commercial potential, he begins negotiating with publishers and literary agents while simultaneously preparing DeFeo's appeal, creating a situation where the supernatural claims must be maintained and embellished regardless of their truth. The more dramatic and unbelievable the story becomes, the more valuable it is as both legal strategy and entertainment property. Jay Anson enters this conspiracy as someone who understands that his job is to create compelling fiction rather than document historical fact. His contract with the Lutzes specifically allows him to dramatize their experiences for narrative effectiveness, giving him carte blanche to add supernatural incidents that never occurred and eliminate inconvenient facts that might undermine the story's credibility. Anson approaches the project like a screenwriter adapting a true story for Hollywood, prioritizing dramatic impact over accuracy. The financial arrangements between all parties create powerful incentives for everyone to maintain the supernatural narrative, regardless of mounting evidence that it's fraudulent. Weber stands to profit from book and movie deals, while potentially winning an appeal for his client. The Lutzes receive substantial payments for their story rights, plus ongoing royalties from all adaptations. Anson gets a bestseller that establishes his career as a horror writer. Everyone involved makes more money by keeping the lie alive than they could earn by telling the truth. You discover that the supernatural incidents described in the book are carefully constructed using a technique that psychologists call confabulation, the process by which people create false memories that feel completely real to them. The Lutzes begin to genuinely believe in experiences that they initially helped fabricate, creating a feedback loop where psychological self-deception reinforces deliberate fraud. By the time investigators begin asking hard questions, George and Kathy may no longer be able to distinguish between what they actually experienced and what they helped create for commercial purposes. The role of the Warren investigators in legitimizing the Amityville claims reveals another layer of professional opportunism disguised as scientific research. Ed and Lorraine Warren built their careers by validating supernatural claims that generate media attention and commercial opportunities, creating a symbiotic relationship with families who need expert confirmation of their paranormal experiences. Their investigation of 112 Ocean Avenue produces exactly the kind of evidence that supports the Lutzes story while advancing the Warrens' reputation as leading paranormal researchers. The famous photograph of the ghost boy peering around the staircase banister exemplifies how supposed evidence is manufactured through a combination of technical manipulation and psychological suggestion. The image is created using multiple exposure techniques that layer different photographs to produce an apparent supernatural figure, but it's presented as a single photograph taken during the investigation. The Warrens know the image is artificially created, but they also understand that dramatic visual evidence is essential for maintaining public interest in paranormal research. Historians still debate whether the Warrens were conscious participants in the Amityville fraud. or genuine believers who allowed their enthusiasm for supernatural phenomena to override their critical judgment. But their role in legitimizing obviously fabricated evidence suggests at least willful self-deception motivated by professional and financial interests. The Catholic Church's involvement in the Amityville case represents a more complex form of institutional opportunism, where religious authorities recognize that supernatural claims can serve multiple purposes beyond their literal truth value. The Church benefits from public association with dramatic spiritual warfare that demonstrates the continuing relevance of religious faith in an increasingly secular society. Even if Church officials privately doubt the specifics of the Amityville claims, they can support the general principle that evil forces exist and require religious intervention. The psychological damage inflicted on the Lutz children by their parents' participation in this elaborate deception may be the most disturbing aspect of the entire conspiracy. Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa are forced to maintain supernatural claims that they know are false, creating cognitive dissonance that affects their ability to trust their own perceptions and form healthy relationships with adults. They grow up understanding that their parents prioritized financial gain over honesty, and that respected authorities, including lawyers, writers, and religious figures, were willing to exploit their family's trauma for commercial purposes. What you need to understand about the Amityville conspiracy is that it represents a perfect example of how modern American capitalism can corrupt even the most intimate human experiences, transforming genuine suffering into commercial entertainment without regard for the psychological cost to those involved. The supernatural explanation for the Lutz family's ordeal may be fictional, but the exploitation they endured at the hands of professionals who should have protected them was entirely real. The most tragic irony of the Amityville horror is that the Lutz family's actual experience dealing with financial stress, psychological trauma, and the challenge of blending two households in a house where multiple murders had occurred was genuinely horrifying in ways that didn't require supernatural embellishment. Their real story of human resilience in the face of overwhelming challenges could have been inspiring rather than terrifying, but it wasn't dramatic enough to generate the massive profits that everyone involved was seeking. You stand at 112 Ocean Avenue in the present day, 47 years after the DeFeo murders and nearly 5 decades since. The Lutz family fled in terror, and you need to understand that the house looks almost embarrassingly ordinary for something that is supposed to be America's most haunted residence. The current owners have painted over the distinctive red brick exterior, replaced the iconic quarter-moon windows with conventional rectangles, and installed modern security systems that seem more concerned with keeping curiosity seekers out than supernatural entities in. Yet the Amityville horror refuses to die, continuing to generate new movies, books, television shows, and paranormal investigations with a persistence that would be impressive if it weren't so obviously commercially motivated. The house has been sold multiple times since the Lutz family's departure, and each new owner faces the same challenge: living in a property that's simultaneously famous and unmarketable, valuable as a cultural landmark, but nearly impossible to inhabit normally because of the constant stream of ghost hunters, horror fans, and media attention that the address attracts. Most owners eventually change the street number and alter the exterior appearance in desperate attempts to achieve anonymity. But 112 Ocean Avenue's notoriety proves impossible to escape completely. What you're re-witnessing is the transformation of a genuine tragedy into a self-perpetuating cultural myth that generates profits for everyone except the people who actually lived through the original trauma. The Amityville horror has spawned more than 30 films, countless books, television documentaries, video games, and even a Broadway musical, each adaptation adding new layers of fiction to a story that was largely fabricated from the beginning. The entertainment industry has discovered that audiences prefer supernatural explanations to psychological ones, making the Amityville brand more valuable as mythology than it ever was as history. The financial success of the Amityville franchise creates powerful incentives for new claimants to emerge with their own supernatural experiences, leading to what paranormal researchers call contagion hauntings, where people unconsciously model their claims on famous cases like Amityville. Police departments across America report increased calls about supernatural activity whenever a new Amityville movie is released, suggesting that the fictional story influences how people interpret ordinary household noises, drafts, and settling sounds that they might otherwise ignore. Here's the detail that reveals the enduring commercial appeal of the Amityville story. Horror fans continue to pay premium prices for guided tours of Ocean Avenue, overnight stays in supposedly haunted hotels nearby, and souvenirs that claim to contain authentic materials from the original house. The local tourism industry has embraced the supernatural association despite residents' complaints about privacy invasion and property damage caused by trespassers seeking paranormal experiences. The psychological legacy of the Amityville horror extends far beyond entertainment into serious discussions about the nature of reality, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, and the power of suggestion to create false memories that feel completely authentic to those who experience them. Psychologists use the case as a teaching tool for understanding how normal people can become convinced of extraordinary claims through a combination of environmental stress, social pressure, and cognitive biases that make supernatural explanations seem more plausible than mundane ones. The Lutz family members who survived the media circus have largely retreated from public view, though they occasionally emerge to defend their original claims or distance themselves from the most obvious fabrications. George Lutz, who died in 2006, maintained until his death that supernatural forces had attacked his family at 112 Ocean Avenue, though he acknowledged that some elements of Jay Anson's book were exaggerated for dramatic effect. Kathy Lutz has given fewer interviews but continues to insist that something genuinely evil drove them from the house, even if she can't explain exactly what that something was. The children who lived through the supposed haunting have reached vastly different conclusions about their experience. Some maintain that they witnessed genuine supernatural phenomena, while others describe a household dominated by psychological dysfunction and adult manipulation that created an atmosphere of terror without requiring any paranormal explanation. Their conflicting accounts reflect the complex ways that childhood trauma and family mythology interact to create memories that may be emotionally true without being factually accurate. Ronald DeFeo Jr., whose murders created the foundation for the entire Amityville phenomenon, died in prison in 2021 after serving 46 years for killing his family. He never benefited financially from the supernatural claims that his crimes inspired, though he occasionally granted interviews where he alternately confessed to the murders and claimed that mysterious forces had controlled his actions. His death closed the final chapter on the original tragedy, though it did nothing to diminish public fascination with the ghost story that grew from his crimes. The Catholic Church's official position on the Amityville case has evolved over the decades as church officials recognize that their initial support for supernatural claims damaged their credibility. When investigations revealed the fabricated nature of much evidence, contemporary church doctrine acknowledges the existence of evil spiritual forces, while requiring much more rigorous verification before endorsing specific claims of demonic activity. The Amityville case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing theological beliefs to override critical thinking. Paranormal investigators continue to visit 112 Ocean Avenue despite the mountain of evidence that the original supernatural claims were fraudulent, demonstrating the persistence of belief systems that prioritize emotional satisfaction over factual accuracy. Modern ghost hunters use increasingly sophisticated equipment to detect electromagnetic fields, temperature variations, and audio phenomena that they interpret as evidence of supernatural presence, but they rarely acknowledge that similar readings can be obtained in any old house with aging electrical systems and poor insulation. The academic community has largely dismissed the Amityville horror as a hoax while recognizing its significance as a cultural phenomenon that reveals important truths about American society's relationship with the supernatural. Sociologists study the case as an example of how mass media can create and sustain false beliefs, while historians use it to examine the intersection of commercialism, spirituality, and entertainment in late 20th century America. Historians still debate whether the enduring popularity of the Amityville story represents a harmless form of entertainment or a more troubling erosion of the distinction between fact and fiction in American culture. But there's no question that the case has fundamentally changed how supernatural claims are marketed and consumed. The template established by the Amityville horror, combining real tragedy with fabricated supernatural elements and presenting the result as documentary truth, has been copied by countless other true ghost stories that follow the same profitable formula. What you need to understand about the Amityville horror's lasting impact is that it succeeded in ways its creators never intended, becoming a lens through which Americans examine their deepest fears about family home and the possibility that evil forces beyond human control might be influencing their daily lives. The story's power derives not from its factual accuracy but from its ability to articulate anxieties about suburban isolation, domestic violence, mental illness, and financial insecurity that many families recognize from their own experiences. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue continues to attract visitors who hope to encounter the supernatural phenomena described in books and movies. though most leave disappointed by the ordinariness of what they find. The current owners have installed surveillance cameras and motion-activated lights that reveal the true nature of most paranormal activity-curious tourists, local teenagers, and the occasional raccoon exploring the property after dark. Yet the Amityville legend persists with a life of its own, generating new adaptations and interpretations that ensure the story will outlive everyone who participated in creating it. The horror may have been largely fictional, but its cultural impact is entirely real, shaping American beliefs about the supernatural while demonstrating the extraordinary power of well-crafted mythology to influence how people understand the world around them. The final irony of the Amityville horror is that it achieved genuine immortality through fictional means, becoming more famous and influential as a fabricated ghost story than it ever could have been as simple historical fact. The house may no longer be haunted by supernatural forces, but it remains forever possessed by the commercial spirit that transformed human tragedy into entertainment gold, ensuring that the true horror of Amityville, the exploitation of real suffering for profit, will continue to echo through American culture long after the last movie is made and the final book is written. You close your eyes and let the autumn wind carry away the last whispers of Amityville's manufactured terror, feeling the relief that comes from understanding that some monsters exist only in the stories we tell ourselves. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue stands quietly in the fading light, its ordinary windows reflecting nothing more supernatural than passing clouds and the gentle movement of tree branches that have witnessed decades of human drama disguised as otherworldly horror. The real ghosts of Amityville are supernatural entities seeking revenge or demonic forces hungry for human souls. They read the lingering echoes of genuine suffering transformed into commercial entertainment, the psychological scars left on children who grew up learning that adults will sacrifice truth for profit, and the cultural damage inflicted by a society that prefers comfortable lies to uncomfortable realities. Perhaps there's quiet wisdom in recognizing that the most profound horrors are entirely human in origin, requiring no supernatural explanation to chill us to the bone. The DeFeo family's murders were genuinely tragic in ways that needed no embellishment. The Lutz family's psychological crisis deserved compassion rather than exploitation. The countless people who believed in the Amityville horror were unfoolish. They were responding to authentic fears about forces beyond their control that might threaten everything they hold dear. Tonight, somewhere in America, a family gathers around their television to watch another Amityville movie, experiencing the delicious terror of imaginary demons while remaining safely unaware of the very real human capacity for deception, exploitation, and the transformation of tragedy into profit. They'll sleep peacefully afterward, comforted by the knowledge that the horror was only fictional, never suspecting that the true evil of Amityville lay not in supernatural forces but in the ordinary human willingness to build careers on other people's pain. Rest easy knowing that most hauntings exist only in the stories we choose to believe about ourselves.